I think the issue we're seeing is that a lot of faculty don't feel prepared to talk about AI with their students. And then the faculty that do feel prepared to talk about it don't feel like they have enough relevant time to bring it in part of their actual disciplinary discussions with AI.
I first heard my colleagues being concerned about students using AI and catching them. My first instinct was you're going to catch the ones who are the least AI literate, the students who accidentally leave in the last
question.
sentence.
Here's an essay based on your on the prompt.
Or as a large language model.
How do you see AI being used as a tool to kind of amplify creativity or like assist with creativity rather than a tool that you fully would depend on to kind of generate creative writing?
That to me is the sort of crux of all this. I really think that if you use this effectively, it could actually help you. And what I tell my own students too is like, look, let's commit to doing a rough draft, a first draft where you actually have your writing down there too, your ideas. And then I'm going to walk you through how you might use AI and ways to complement those ideas.
So today's guest is Marc Watkins from University of Mississippi. And Marc is an assistant director of academic innovation at the university where he directs the AI Institute for Teachers. So he comes from a background that is kind of on the other side of AI use, where people tend to focus on, how students are utilizing AI. But this episode will pose the question of how are teachers also impacted by AI in education?
Yeah, absolutely. Marc Watkins is incredibly fluent in this, and I encountered his work and thinking for the first time in the Chronicle of Higher Education, where he has an incredible series of articles that our guests should check out, where he opines on all things generative AI in education, I think from a sharp and balanced viewpoint.
Definitely, I agree with you. And I think I'm really interested to learn more about how AI is impacting assessment, how is it impacting preparation for, a course in terms of teaching the course, or even just being proficient in AI as educators as well, not just, thinking about how students are meant to learn or integrate AI in their work.
Would you mind just doing a quick introduction of your bio?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Marc Watkins, and I teach at the University of Mississippi. I'm a lecturer of writing and rhetoric. I also teach in our digital media studies program here. I hold some other titles too that they've sort of invented because of AI in the last 3 years. One is assistant director of academic innovation, where I work with faculty and other academic units about AI literacy efforts and AI fluency efforts on campus. And I'm also a director of the AI Institute for Teachers, which I helped found in the summer of 2023, where we come together as an institution to talk about how AI is affecting our teaching and learning spaces 2 or 3 times a year.
As we were talking about before we started recording, we were so impressed with your articles on the Chronicle of Higher Education, where you have a lot of very interesting takes on AI in education. So I want to start the conversation by asking you about the quiet disaster that you talk about. A quiet disaster is unfolding in college classrooms as students navigate AI without guidance. So what is the most shocking example of this quiet disaster that you have witnessed?
I think the issue we're seeing is that a lot of faculty don't feel prepared to talk about AI with their students. And then the faculty that do feel prepared to talk about it don't feel like they have enough relevant time to bring it in part of their actual disciplinary discussions with AI and their actual teaching. So what we're seeing is a lot from the student perspective and student experience is that a freshman student here at the University of Mississippi might be taking 5, sometimes 6 classes, and they will have 5 or 6 very different AI policies they have to navigate. And some of those policies will be simply silence. They won't actually have any direction from the faculty members because they don't feel that the faculty members don't feel the support enough to actually do that. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to get people together to come together and try to look at some consensus around not policy language, but about guidance. We really believe that open disclosure when you use an AI tool is going to be very important. We also think that it's going to be something we want to start modeling ourselves when we use these tools and these features, both within our own teaching and also within our own research. So we're trying to look for areas where we find that sort of agreement first of all, before we go into the sort of sideload camps of people are really, really excited about this technology. They want to go head first with it and adopt it and make students use this throughout, versus the other end of that spectrum, faculty just do not want to touch this. They want to ban it throughout the actual process. They have deep feelings about what this is doing to student learning, to the environment, to society in general.
You mentioned that you feel that students are eager for standards, and as you say, it's being implemented differently in different classrooms by different professors. What kind of standards might you suggest how to deal with this AI eating the classroom experience?
So I think the most positive way we can do is start thinking about categories where this can be used effectively by students and by faculty alike. We want people who are interested in using AI to help student learning outcomes, and we think the best way to do that is through augmenting a process to or collaborating with an AI tool. We don't think that's a good idea to use that through a complete automation of things. So we kind of start thinking about those types of categories and start to consider what that actually means. It's a lot easier to get people on board to say, well, okay, we might use these skills to to augment a reading process using AI. We want to make sure you don't actually automate the entire process of just throwing a PDF into an automatic summary tool that's going to synthesize it for you too, that's going to give you your actual response. So we're trying to seek this sort of nuance and more or less guidance about how this could be effective in giving faculty the space to explore these different processes.
Do you think that faculty need to kind of reassess what grading looks like now, given that AI has, entered the field of academia in a way?
Yeah, I think that this is what makes a lot of people sort of raise their eyes and think about this, is that faculty are also going to be using these tools in some ways to assess student learning and automate feedback. And that, I think, can be concerning if it's not done in that sort of nuanced way I kind of mentioned beforehand. We are seeing some programs come out there, most recently by Grammarly, that does an AI grader that isn't faculty-led. It's all student-initiated. And we are also seeing some tools being deployed in Canvas and also the Blackboard Learning Management System that will be able to give feedback based off of a rubric, but will still have a faculty member in the loop. I still think that those have some challenges and problems because in my field of writing and also digital media studies too, it's very intensive with the actual students using writing processes through reflection. That's not something we've ever had to automate before in the past. It's not like Scantrons you'd have in a STEM course or something else. And we kind of have seen what that has done to this sort of experience of being a college student. It becomes really transactional, and your classes start becoming big because they can be done through automation. We start seeing fewer faculty on campus. So my worry about that is that if we start getting in a situation too where we really are turning on these tools to automate learning, is that they may not be done in a way that's actually helpful for students. It might be just done in a way that is speaking to the material conditions of our labor. And that, I think, could be a little bit of a concern.
And do you think that, right now, obviously different universities and colleges are implementing kind of rules and policies on how students can utilize AI. Do you suspect that that might also be implemented onto faculty and how they would use AI for assessment, just like the students have the rules with faculty have that too?
That, I think, is the million-dollar question. And it's also something that I think is going to be very different across academia and higher education. Typically speaking, because of academic freedom, most faculty members are given the ability to assess what tools to use with their actual teaching and learning, what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. We don't really have prior examples about this sort of situation, too, of a faculty member being able to automate their entire, in some cases, teaching now with this technology. We don't really have guardrails around that, too. So I don't know if there's going to be rules per se, but I think we should have some really hard and fast guidance about this. What we are seeing from different universities are they're saying to faculty, look, don't use this technology to harass people, which is pretty obvious. Obviously, make sure that if you're loading student work into this too, you're doing so in a FERPA compliant way that's also compliant with HIPAA and other sort of federal laws in the United States. but they're not really talking about the sort of relationship aspect this might have for students. And we start sitting down and talking with students too. And they say, well, how would you feel if I were just going to use an AI system to give you feedback and grade? I did this in one of my classes the first day of class because we were talking about a report from Anthropic, which is about how teachers were actually using this technology too. And I think that one of the things that popped up is one of the students said, my dad would pull me out of here if he knew that my professor was just using AI to give me feedback because I'm paying for this experience to be here with a human being who has expertise. So I think we have to be really careful about this. I'm not saying we shouldn't use AI feedback. There's not a place for it. In fact, California has several universities that are piloting what's called PAIR, which is peer AI instructor and review and reflection. So it really is a way that can integrate AI, I think, very meaningfully to actually help students through that process that keeps the instructor there too, that isn't automated. We really want to sort of focus on that sort of situation between automation and augmentation.
So let me ask you about the phenomenon of cognitive offloading. It's not necessarily the newest phenomenon. You remember the book by Nicholas Carr, The Shallows, which emerged from his article, Is Google Making Us Stupid? So spelled STOOPID. So, this conversation has been going on now. That's at least 15 years old. Actually, I think that's from 2008. So that's 17 years old. It's not breaking news that we've been concerned, that technology is changing our attention or changing the way we consume information, and particularly long form information. But this is a new thing, right? This ability, as you write in your piece, about essentially the death of, to paraphrase what you say, the death of reading, that students can just upload 50 articles to Notebook LM to then just get a kind of custom podcast for them. So maybe you could just speak to this modern incarnation of or manifestation of cognitive offloading and what concerns you may have about it.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's not new. In fact, Neil Postman and others were writing about this decades before. In '94, Neil Postman wrote about Technopoly, about how new technologies change the structure of our interests and how we communicate with each other online. And we're just sort of not really aware of it because we just adopt things. I used to bring this up with my students in digital media studies all the time before generative AI. We would pull out my cell phone, like, look, how many hours a day do you spend on this now communicating with people? How many apps have you actually downloaded? How many digital agreements, contracts have you signed? You guys have signed more contracts than I have at your age in your life, and you haven't read any of these things. It's just changed our habits about how technology has been here too. And I do think having a computer in our pockets as a smartphone has really accelerated how advanced digital technology has started to change and alter our interests. I do want to make sure, and I have to be careful about this too, because I do feel like that there's like two ends of this binary spectrum where people are like going back to like, we're going to ban all technology in our classrooms too. We're just going to go back to physical pen and paper. You're going to bring a book and we're going to read it for an hour and a half. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's one version of this versus the other one, which is the fear that they're going to just go use this technology like Notebook LM and completely offload reading. I think it's going to end up somewhere in the middle, where this technology, if it's used intentionally and effectively, can help support actual reading practices in a way that's healthy. But in order to do that, you have to have a conversation with students, and you have to start thinking about AI as more than just a text-generating tool that students are using to cheat or offload learning. You have to think about this as a new way for them to actually experience the world, and you have to also give them some ground rules about what this is going to do and make them very aware of it. I think that we're kind of in that stage right now where we're talking about text, really, but the new tools that are coming out and have been out now for a while are completely multimodal. You can talk with AI now. You can activate your camera. AI can watch you and look at you and can react and respond to you. And those are some really big features that I think a lot of faculty and a lot of students haven't really responded to or thought about how this is going to change how we interact with information.
We spoke about this with our previous guest, Dr. John Gibbs from the University of Georgia. And it was the article by Clay Shirky that you may have seen. It was in the New York Times. There's been a lot of interesting articles, a lot of hot takes on AI. But this one was very interesting because he more or less says we need to go back to the Middle Ages and saying that that while, as you say, like AI can augment learning when used in this thoughtful, purposeful way. In practice, students don't do that because when they're under pressure, they default to basically, brute forcing it, right? Just put the essay prompt in there and get this thing done before the deadline, and that this is almost like an irresistible temptation. So I don't know. I wanted to ask you maybe about this idea that we need to go back to the Middle Ages, and by that I mean, like strip all technology away from students, and that you're just kind of doing classical oral exams and blue book written exams, and essentially we find out what the person actually knows when stripped away of all their cybernetic technology.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Middle Ages had its problems. I think we could say that too in education. I'm actually teaching two sections right now too, and I have accommodation requests from students from disability services. I have multiple requests for students who are requesting a word processor. I've never seen those requests report for teaching for 15 years. We're now seeing that coming out here because a lot of faculty are pulling that technology out of their classroom. I would never have a situation too where I would ban technology from my actual teaching because I can't do that with all those students who are having these issues with disabilities. And then if I did accommodate them, they're going to then be singled out in the classroom. Why does Johnny have to have a laptop and I can't have my laptop? Why does Susie get to record these types of things? I want to be as inclusive as I can be. And one of the things too, I would say about those people that really want to go back in time to these types of things to test their students is that in what world are we going to exist in where they're not going to have access to these technologies? What sort of jobs experiences are they going to have? I think the more nuanced approach to this is what the University of Sydney is piloting now with their two-lane approach to assessment. In that situation too, the first lane is closed assessments where they either paper pen exam or oral exams, or they do proctored testing in some way. But the second lane of assessment there too is all AI generated content and material that students have access to those. So it's a marrying of two different types of principles. It's not really going over very well because it's really contentious for faculty. And like most compromise positions too, like it's upsetting both sides because if you're really pro AI, you still have to go ahead and actually do AI generated assignments with your students versus if you're really anti-AI, you have to make sure that everything is locked down. I think I screwed up those two positions in my mind too because it's so crazy to do the binaries. But that's one example of just how this is sort of like playing out in our world too. I would really have a situation too where if you could carve out 15 minutes once a week to have a conversation with your students about this, to see then if the reaction from yourself and your students change about their attitudes towards using AI. Show them reports about what this is doing to their world with in terms of jobs, especially for new hires that are coming out here too with fresh graduates that are really struggling to find jobs. Talk to them about the actual skills. Talk to them about the fact too that most of the reporting with hiring indicates that people are using ChatGPT to write resumes and AI is being used to read those resumes. Well, what's the point of having human connection then? Get them to start thinking about those things. Again, the main challenge there too is that time. How much time do we have in our classes to bring this up? And in terms of our disciplines that we're teaching too, it's very limited.
Yeah, I remember, again, going back to the dark ages of the web, which by that I mean the mid-2000s, right? That's kind of like when the Web 2.0 term was coined. And that's when I became kind of interested in really, intentionally interested in technology. And I remember hearing about a valedictorian that graduated from a top school bragging that they had never read an entire book. And that was kind of, at the time, shocking. But if you zoom out, you realize that that really, it's not that hard to imagine because do you really need to have read War and Peace or Crime and Punishment from cover to cover in an era where efficiency is what matters? Can you get to the information? This is pre-AI, generative AI, but more like the era of just Google and Wikipedia and that phenomenon. So I wonder if maybe you could speak to what is the literacy that will matter. I mean, could you speculate on the type of literacies that will matter for people in 5 years, 10 years? I mean, in other words, is it just going to be how well you can use these tools, get to the information quickly, as opposed to this fantasy or dream, this idealistic vision of some medieval monk reading, some tome cover to cover, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to be very cautious about the hype too with this technology too. Critical thinking still matters. Ethical decision making still matters too. I think the person who gave the valedictorian address to that said they never read a book fully too is also probably someone who's high level functioning in all those categories, and they're navigating these spaces too. They're learning how to do that. They're not using a technology to do that for them. I've said this before too, and to a lot of tech companies, like, look, teaching and learning is not a problem for AI to solve. It's not. You're going to have to be able to be functional in terms of your ability to communicate with people. And that's something we've been talking a lot about with students too, before generative AI, that happened really during COVID, is the ability to actually have a conversation with someone too, to actually talk with them, to actually be able to express your ideas so they can see that you have value as a human being, not just a report that's going to be on someone's docket too. And I think that's going to be something that we'll see a lot more people really doubling down on. The thing that sort of scares me, that's also somewhat hopeful about AI too, I mean, this is the sort of area we get into, is that this technology is going to make education affordable and accessible to almost everyone around the world. The trade-off with that is, though, you may not always have a human being giving you that education. It may be by a chatbot, it may be by an avatar of someone that looks like someone, and that's going to have some pretty profound consequences of what a college degree means going forward. It's going to really talk about the fact, too, that if you can afford to go work with someone that's a human being and have that sort of experience of a residential college education versus one that's fully online, where your teachers may not be all human, maybe a mix of both those human teachers, too, and also using AI tools to actually do that. I think that's going to have a really big consequential effect for our world.
Is that a dystopian vision for you then? I mean, I just saw an interview on, I think, Hard Fork. There's a new startup. It's a K-12 school that's completely AI powered, and we're going to see more and more. Salman Khan is actually pushing the idea. I'm not sure how far he's gotten, but Sal Khan, the...
An academy.
Yeah, Sal Khan, yeah. And Sal Khan has bona fides too. He's not, some Silicon Valley guy coming in there too. He's been at Khan Academy for decades. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that for some instances, that makes a lot of sense, especially if you don't have resources, if you don't have access, then that could be a wonderful transformative experience for you. But if you're trying to have a relationship with a human being, if that technology is used to replace that, then that's where it becomes dystopian for me. And one of the schools, I don't know if this is the one you're thinking about too, but it's called the Alpha Academy. It came out of Austin. It's now been spreading around there.
That's it. That's the one. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, the Alpha Academy. And what they've been doing is using AI and sort of like a mix of Montessori. And it's cost a crazy amount of money. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars is what their parents are paying for their kids to do this. They have like 2 hours of AI generated content teaching that they go through. And then the rest of the day are not teachers, but it's human beings functioning as guides. And they're reporting really massive success out of this. Well, maybe that would work for some cases. If you can afford $40,000, $50,000 a year to do this, you probably have other resources too you can give to your students, to your kids to actually do this. I don't think that's going to work in a rural setting if you have a really poor school district. I just think that that's going to be a recipe for disaster because, look, there are some areas in the United States, just like in the world too, where the one place a kid can get a hot meal is at school. And that's a terrible, horrible thing to think about. But that's the one area that they can actually have food security, is having a hot meal for breakfast and for lunch during those days. And I would really hate for us to see this sort of experience of AI come in here too and think they're going to be able to fix that.
Another thing about AI and how accessible it is by students, whether they're in schools or they're in universities or colleges, is that I mean, you have to be literate in AI in order for you to use it. But then being literate in AI also has a cost of some sort. So when it comes to AI and equity, I think there are opportunities in terms of, like information being accessible to people and not having to go for like a 4-year bachelor's degree program to learn a certain topic or field. But at the same time, there is a risk, I mean, in terms of access and bias and maybe even language barriers. So yeah, I mean, there's kind of this like gray line in between both.
I think you're hitting this right on the head too. When you start unpacking the equity issues in AI too, it's literally just one layer after the next. We're really being in higher education as a whole on the receiving end of a lot of these tech companies' offers to say, let's activate AI on your campus too to address equity issues. Well, what sort of AI are we activating and what are we sort of giving up in that process is one thing. The other issue too is that we now have GPT-5, which is not just one model, but 5 models back behind things too. And to get to the highest level of model two, the actual functional ones for GPT-5 Pro, you're looking at $200 a month to have access to that. And so you can give general access to some AI tools, but if it's not the most profound, most capable tool in the market too, what is that going to do for access and equity? What happens when you're dealing with a classroom where some students are not using AI, some are using the free AI, some are doing the $20 a month plan, and like 1 or 2 of them is somehow able to afford the $200 a month plan. No one's really has that figured out at all because that isn't fair in any way. It's really unclear how you'd even really assess the type of student work, let alone if the teacher is then using a variety of the AI tools too.
In your role, advising, I think, and mentoring faculty at Ole Miss on AI in the classroom, what are some of the things that you may have observed without naming names, kind of trends or themes that faculty may confide in you or that you observed as particularly interesting or terrifying?
I think our faculty are really doing a great job here too. They've really adopted a stance of guarded skepticism toward these tools. They're not diving headfirst into these. They're not buying the tech company claims. They're really starting to have conversations with students. We're really lucky that we're one of the few universities that's an R1 that has not gutted their humanities programs. So we have huge opportunity for humanities to really make an impact and have these sort of conversations. We also are starting to see this in our STEM courses too. They're slowing things down. They're having conversations about these things. They're bringing it up with students too. And students are actually responding really well. They're inquisitive. They want to know about these processes. We, like any university, still struggle with students using this uncritically and sometimes ways to do it to commit academic misconduct. We've been working on ways to try to walk students through what their responsibilities are. I've really been advocating a lot for accountability and looking at restorative practices in that. So we don't just go up and take them up on charges and say, look, you used AI, you're going to get kicked out of this class, you're going to get an F. Instead, let's have a conversation about what was done here too. Let's see if we can't restore trust. Let's see if we can't talk about what our actual ethical obligation is to each other, to the classroom, and see if that can't be used to address some of these things. But going back to this sort of 30,000-foot view about all of this, everything I've just described takes a lot of time on the instructor's part. And that time is the big thing that they talk about more than anything else. It's sort of maddening to think about that this technology that's supposed to be making us more efficient is actually costing us more time to actually implement and navigate it every single day inside of our classrooms. And I would really hope instead of having federal funding being directed in terms of more data centers and more schools, they actually start directing sort of funding to the actual human consequences of what this is doing to actually teach people how to navigate this space.
Probably everyone saw, and I'm sure you probably saw, the article called "Everyone is Cheating Their Way Through College" that kind of went around, and that was by James Walsh. And you mentioned earlier the problems we observed with distance learning during COVID. And I wonder if you could speak to a little bit, maybe potential lasting negative consequences of, first was the forced distance learning situation that, in a way, messed up a whole cohort, as you were talking about earlier, didn't have the sort of, well, we found out we did a massive experiment on what happens when suddenly everyone has to learn from home. But then only, a few semesters later, then, as you say, ChatGPT hits, but without any guidance or guardrails or anything, so that essentially people are just thrown in the deep end. And then, as James Walsh puts it, everyone is essentially cheating their way through college. And so you could make the argument that you have an entire cohort that first had this COVID sort of disaster, and then the next thing that happened was they were able to just kind of get through, that's at least 2 or 3 years of college without having to actually do any work. So maybe you could speak to that, maybe potentially negative long-term consequences of both of those things.
I think there are potential long-term consequences with all of that too, both for critical thinking and what we're talking about with the actual student experience. I think that the situation is a little bit more dynamic than that too, because we're also seeing a lot of students being taken up on charges using AI detectors that are, generally speaking, not very reliable. That's also affecting the student experience and the student outcomes. And that will, 15, 20 years from now, really make people think back to their actual experience of being in college. They're, for various reasons too, everyone's paying to some degree to go to college, whether you got a scholarship or something else too, or someone else, that really may get to a situation too where the value of college is completely undermined in a lot of people's minds 10, 15 years from now too, when they start going out there, having children, starting their world too, and starting to question, do I want to send my own son or daughter one day to college? So I think we have to be really cautious about how this is being played out here too. We want to remember that there are obligations that we have to actually teach, making sure that our students actually understand the content that's being taught too, and to understand too that if we are suspecting that they're not doing that work too, that there are hopefully procedures that we could take in place and follow those procedures, and not just randomly take someone's essay or take their actual test and run it through a variety of AI detectors that we don't have any licensing agreements with, that we don't know what does to actual privacy or student data, and just sort of making a judgment based off of these black box systems about if a student should fail or pass a class.
Is it not true that these AI plagiarism detectors don't work? I mean, that's pretty much the consensus that I've heard. Is that what you're speaking? You're talking about the plagiarism?
Yeah, AI detectors, broadly speaking, are not reliable in academic contexts. Sometimes you can get them to work really well in labs, but generally speaking, the minute you actually add human-based writing to one of these detectors is that they start failing. There've also been several reports too about students that are non-native English speakers too being dinged on these detectors, much higher rates than native speaking students. We're also seeing reports too about, Turnitin now has a humanized detector, because one of the most popular tools on ChatGPT is a humanizer that makes it sound more humanizing. So there's just layer after layer of different AI detection services out there too. Yeah, so it's really complicated, and I think that from my own personal testing too, and what I've read too about research, is that most AI detection is unreliable in those academic situations.
Yeah, and I mean, that was my first instinct when I first heard my colleagues being concerned about AI, basically students using AI and catching them. And I realized, my first instinct was, you're going to catch the ones who are the least AI literate.
Absolutely.
who are like not as savvy with how to essentially change, edit it, change the voice, make it sound like it's their own.
Right.
The students who accidentally leave in the last
question.
sentence.
Here's an essay based on your on the prompt.
Or as a large language model, which is the other phrasing that used to happen quite a bit. Yeah.
So in a way, you're in that sense, you're punishing you're actually rewarding the students who are the most, in a way, savvy at using the tools to, quote unquote, cheat. And then, of course, I guess the definition of cheating is kind of changing before our eyes. Here at NUQ, I was the chair of the academic integrity committee for like a couple of years. And during that time, dealing with, the things you deal with in that committee, basically, if we found a student we definitely had a ghostwriter write their paper, it was obvious ultimately, and they even would confess to it. Like, in other words, in the metadata of the Word document, you can see the name of the person who wrote it for them, and that kind of thing. Well, that was considered a serious, and I'm talking, this is not ancient history, this is 2023. That was considered a serious academic integrity violation, that someone else wrote your paper, a ghostwriter. But what's weird in 2024, 2025 is that, like, you could argue that everybody has a ghostwriter now. And that suddenly we're supposed to change our whole mentality that this is normal, this is the new normal, and it's not cheating anymore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's very dramatic shift, and contract cheating still exists. When you talk about it, it's not just done through AI systems; it's actually done through other human beings still doing the work of other folks too. In fact, they might be using AI tools. I think what started to shift in our minds too is that it's not just students using these tools to do the work of actually learning. In some cases, it's teachers using this to actually grade. Some faculty are doing this right now. So Mike Sharple said this in 2022, about 6 months before ChatGPT was launched. His nightmare scenario was that students are going to be using AI to complete their assessments. Faculty are going to be using them to give feedback and grade. What's the purpose of university in that situation? Where's learning going to take place? That's why we have to have these conversations about this and have a discussion about what this actually means. And I think that when you start just sort of laying bare just what's the existential threat, in my opinion, which is our sort of existence as a learning industry for university, then I think that makes this a much more timely conversation to bring up to certain faculty who have been sort of ignoring this.
So as a writer and someone that is rooted in creative writing and rhetoric, how do you see AI being used as a tool to kind of amplify creativity or like assist with creativity rather than a tool that you fully would depend on as a student to kind of generate creative writing?
That to me is the sort of crux of all this. I really think that if you use this effectively, it could actually help you. And what I tell my own students too is like, look, let's commit to doing a rough draft, a first draft where you actually have your writing down there too, your ideas. And then I'm going to walk you through how you might use AI in ways to complement those ideas, how it could actually help extend your thinking, explore different counter arguments, explore different ways you could conclude this actual post too, or the story, or how this would sound for different audiences. I think we just have to have that relationship built with our students too, where we have the trust with saying like, look, okay, I'm going to agree that I'm going to bring myself to this assignment. I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to trust that if this work's yours. But then after that's done too, we're going to explore AI and we're going to do this openly. We just have to work on establishing that too, and also probably the conditions in the actual learning space to make that happen.
Well, thank you so much, Marc, for being the second guest on our new podcast exploring the intersection of AI in education. As I mentioned at the beginning, your articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education on AI are very insightful and very useful, and I appreciate the work you're doing there, and I hope that you will continue to write more pieces because I think they're helping faculty everywhere figure this out and think their way through this.
I really do appreciate this, guys, and thank you so much. This has been a really great discussion, too. I'm happy to hear that you guys are starting this podcast, too. I think it's an important space to have this conversation.
Thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful speaking with you, and we look forward to seeing more of your writing about this very topic, AI in education.
You guys are most welcome. Thank you all.
So what do you think
of Marc Watkins and his take on AI and ethics and assessments?
I think Marc Watkins was, as advertised, incredibly fluent on the topic of generative AI in education, how it's disrupting things everywhere. Some of the themes that emerged, we talked about the controversial topic was looked at in a study by Anthropic about how instructors are using AI for how they're using AI, and also controversially how they're using AI for grading. We talked a bit about that. We talked about the fact that panic in the academy over technology disruption is not necessarily new.
And of course, all roads lead back to Neil Postman and his famous book from the 1980s, which is called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he brought that up. And that's all about how attention spans in the 80s were already shortening with TV culture. But then Marc Watkins, I think he took it to Nick Carr, 2008, the book The Shallows, which is an acceleration of that same phenomenon of shortening attention. So Nick Carr wrote the article, Is Google Making Us Stupid?, which he then adapted into the book The Shallows. And it's just a long opining on this idea of short hits of information as opposed to long form reading, and how that was already rewiring and remapping our brains as far back as, again, in Nick Carr's view, as far back as 2008 or so. So the guest, Marc Watkins, was familiar with that. He put generative AI in that trajectory as the newest incarnation of this phenomenon.
Right. And I think I really appreciated his kind of analysis of AI for transparency rather than detecting. I think it creates a healthy environment where both students and faculty could use AI for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And it's not just about kind of policing students, it's more about how are you exercising your literacy in AI to help you with your coursework. And there's different levels to that, of course. You can be either heavily dependent on it, where you're not fully exercising what you signed up to higher education for, or you could be using it as kind of like a tool that you're not fully dependent on, but more of a tool that assists you with certain things, which I find really interesting.
He presents, again, a balanced view and a path forward, as you say, centered on transparency. Because what you notice in the classroom now, at least I do, is students feel like they've found the cheat code to higher education. And they don't want to tell anybody because they have the cheat code and they don't want you to know they have the cheat code. And I see that, and that's a lack of transparency. So people are pretending that ChatGPT is not the giant generative AI elephant in the room.
Right.
But it is, and it has overwhelmed assessment and traditional instruction models in the classroom, particularly assessment models. And I think Marc Watkins presents a very sensible and balanced view with this emphasis on transparency on both the instructor and the students.